Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about working flexibly. It's about flexibility as the essence of modern work, capturing, absorbing, and optimizing the dynamics of work for your business and workforce. This is about stepping back and reassessing fundamentally how work at your company is best enabled, based on modern work parameters. Working flexibly is a foundational orientation. It's a pervasive mindset that is essential for executing modern business strategies, framing how your company operates within its ecosystem, coordinates with vendors and strategic partners, designs processes, manages employees, and supports their productive working lives. Where work happens is one integral component of employees' modern work setup and experiences. So let's consider working space flexibility. Work environments can flex on demand to adjust for the changing needs of your business and employees, depending on their individual and overall geographic spread and travel requirements, and the desire to convene for different tasks and projects over specific days, weeks, and months. Have you yet explored how your team or department could benefit from flexible and on-demand working space arrangements as part of your strategic modern work framework and plans? I'm delighted to be speaking with Amina Moreau, founder and CEO of Radious, which is an online marketplace that turns houses, apartments, and other residential properties into collaborative workspaces, rentable by the day. Radious eliminates the commute, bringing the office to employees' local neighborhoods as a flexible way to combat burnout and bring people together. Hi, Amina. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to chat.
It is great to chat. And you started off by studying psychology. What took you down that road?
Oh my goodness. I changed majors 5 times.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a little bit of a labyrinthian journey to figure out exactly what I wanted to be when I grow up. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I want to be when I grow up.
Takes a long time.
I was going down a path that was prescribed to me by family expectations at first. And happily so, I thought I wanted to become a doctor. It was the acceptable path to either become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer in my family, as in many families. And I really thought from an early age that I wanted to be a physician. And I started going down that path, all the biology courses, pre-med track, etc.
I did
and
see
I
the
was
biology.
enjoying
Yes.
it.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it is there in my history. But somewhere along the way, I also realized that, my goodness, the hobby that I had fallen in love with, which is photography and filmmaking, could actually be profitable. And having bounced around from biology to poli-sci at one point, and then to psychology and a little bit of neuroscience, I realized that one of the best thing that you can study is how people think. Because in any profession, understanding how the brain works is kind of handy. And so I ultimately decided on psychology. And for the first part of my career, my dad wagged his finger at me a little bit. And he was like, well, you just did this educational endeavor focusing on psychology. And wait, you're starting a business in photography? What gives? How are you ever going to use what you just spent all this time on? And in the beginning, I had no idea. But it actually turns out that to tell someone's story through the medium of either photography or film or otherwise, it really comes down to understanding who they are, them understanding who they are. That's a big ball of wax, a can of worms, if you will.
Yes.
And And it actually turns out that having a psychology background is really, really valuable in storytelling. And the first part of my career was all in how to tell people's stories, whether it was in a personal context, in a marketing context, did a lot of consulting with companies on how to reach their audiences in more efficient ways, how to be a more effective communicator in the courtroom, did some consulting with legal teams. And
that must have been
it
using the
turns out
psychology as
psychology's
well.
handy.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, when you're taking a picture, that's a moment in time. There is a story behind it. But when was that realization of how much story there is there, or how you wanted to tell that? And when that photo then became longer and became a film?
In the very first part of my career, my co-founder and I, we had founded a wedding storytelling company. So we were doing both photo and video simultaneously.
Right.
And in the beginning, our philosophy was, let's be as creative as we possibly can. Let's invest in cool equipment, and let's innovate in how all of our imagery looks and feels. Let's be the industry leaders on how things look.
Okay.
That was our initial impetus, and it was really fun because every weekend we would go out and shoot a wedding or two, and every time we would be doing something different visually. But there's only so much you can do. Eventually you run out.
Right.
And it started to feel repetitive, partly because if you think about the plot structure of a wedding, the story is the same every time, weekend in, weekend out. And we did weddings across cultures, so sometimes there were very different traditions. But at the end of the day, the plot and the climax, like all of it, it was a little bit cookie cutter. And we started asking ourselves, how can we make this more interesting?
Right.
And it occurred to us, well, hang on a second. The one thing that is different every single time is the people. So what if we took a moment to get to know the people, their hopes and dreams? Why are they marrying each other? What in their childhood has shaped them to become the types of people that they are? What do they see for their future, and why?
Right.
And all of a sudden, everything became new again. But not only that, the storytelling became so much deeper, because now instead of just focusing on pretty imagery, which is kind of surface level, we started building metaphor. And instead of just shooting the diamond in that beautiful ring, we shot tomatoes at a farmer's market, because we learned that tomatoes were a metaphor for how this couple saw their lives together. Right. And I can go into the details of the tomato story.
Yeah, it's stretching. I'm going from a diamond to a tomato. Perhaps you might just throw a little bit more light on the tomato story.
The nutshell is that before meeting her, he hated tomatoes.
Okay.
And now they're an integral part of his diet, and he has learned to love them. And it is just one way that his life has been made richer as a result of knowing her. And they actually weaved tomatoes into their vows. So their 4-minute highlights video that is kind of an overview of their day is just their vows, and then all of the narration has to do with tomatoes. And so instead of just shooting hair and makeup in the morning and the ceremony and stuff like that, we specifically scheduled time to go to a farmer's market and shoot tomatoes. We brought a big bag of tomatoes to the wedding, and after the ceremony, when we were doing the photo shoot with just the couple, they ate tomatoes like they were apples. And there's this one beautiful shot in their film where each of them has a tomato. Each of those tomatoes has a bite taken out of it. And then, without even prompting them, they switched.
Oh.
And right at that point of the video, in the narration, they're talking about sharing. And it's that one shot makes the whole film.
Right.
Because that is what their relationship is about. It's about growing together, introducing new things to each other, and sharing not just their lives together, but these little things that in life are otherwise inconsequential, but they combine and they accumulate into a beautiful life together that is like no other.
You tell the story
and that's
very
what
well.
made it fun.
Yeah,
That's what
fun.
ultimately made it so much fun, and we developed friendships, deep
Mm.
relationships with these people.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden, they went from having a film that just showed what their wedding looked like to
Right.
who they were as people at the time that they were getting married, so that their children and their grandchildren could look back and actually learn who they were at that time.
Right.
And that to me is way more special.
Absolutely. So many of the things that you've done have storytelling as being the core element of it. And these are companies mostly that you've set up yourself, right?
With a team,
Storytelling.
yes, of course, yes.
What were the different stories for these different storytelling companies before we get to where you are now?
So Still Motion was the very first company that I
Mhm.
co-founded in a dorm room, effectively,
Oh,
while we were
okay.
still doing our schooling. And it ended up being the catalyst for whether I continued with schooling and went on to graduate school,
Right.
or went on to continue with this company that was successful sort of by accident. We didn't really plan for it, but we had launched this thing, it was working. And so we decided to pursue that because you can always go back to school. At least
Sure.
we were in a privileged position where we could. So we decided to pursue this, and that company still exists together today. Sorry, um, about 20 years later, and it certainly evolved. We started in weddings, but we ended up moving into more commercial applications. We did some documentaries
Mm.
that ended up winning us a few Emmy awards. That ended up opening up a lot of doors to
Congratulations.
opportunities that were, I mean, life-changing sometimes. But that company ended up incubating a bunch of other startup ideas that we had because we saw gaps in the market.
Mhm.
And we thought, well, if we have the resources to try to address some issues that exist out there, then why not
Well, that
start,
isn't
for
necessarily
example.
a logical thought sequence. I'm a filmmaker, I've made some documentaries, and there's a gap in the marketplace. Let me start a business about something else completely different.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and in some ways they were different. For example, one of the gaps that we found was people were stealing music for their films, other filmmaking companies,
Okay.
because there weren't really very good solutions for finding
Mm.
good music that
Okay.
was affordable for
Right.
small filmmaking houses.
True.
And so they were just stealing top 40 music. So one of the companies that we ended up launching was a music licensing company
Ah,
that worked with smaller artists that didn't need millions of dollars
got it.
for usage of their work, but a few hundred or a few thousand would
Mhm.
move
Mhm.
the needle for them in their careers. And then it enabled access to great music to mom and pop filmmakers as well. So that was
Nice.
one.
Yep.
And we did several like that in various realms. And 4 companies later, and 2 acquisitions later, because a couple of those companies ended up being purchased, that brought me personally to launching Radious, which is the company that I am all in on
Yeah, first of
now.
all, the pandemic and the float small business, because I know that that
Yeah.
was a nonprofit, but I'm interested in it because apart from anything, entrepreneurs have a specific mindset or a range
Mm.
of mindsets, which is very different from people who are working in large enterprises. They
Mhm.
typically have more understanding of who they are and what their skills are and what they're good at and what they're not good at, because they've had to. You started up this nonprofit in March 2020 and through to August 23. That's a solid period of time that you were working on this and helping entrepreneurs. What were you seeing through that time? Because obviously that was a very difficult time, certainly at the beginning. And then people rallied and were raw and vulnerable with each other. I'm curious as to what you were experiencing in Oregon. And obviously, I imagine lots of connections and support remotely because that's what we had to do,
Mhm.
and how that maybe
Yeah.
was part of the genesis of Radius.
It it was in a lot of ways, yes. So the nonprofit initiative that you're talking about was Float Small Business. And initially, the spark for the idea came from the fact that during the lockdowns of the pandemic, so many small businesses were struggling just to stay afloat,
Sure.
which is why we called it Float. And And so while it was about supporting entrepreneurship, more specifically, it was about the brick and mortar shops that were in our community that were no longer getting any customers because customers were forced to stay at home.
Right.
And perhaps these shops, restaurants, for example, right? You can't serve food online in the same way.
Yeah.
Certainly, you can have it delivered, but so many companies were struggling and we wanted to help. And so we simply created a matchmaking service that allowed people who wanted to support those businesses to buy digital gift cards to
Okay.
help bring in some revenue to these businesses,
Okay.
whether you intended to actually use those gift cards in the end or not really
Right.
didn't matter. But if
Right.
you could buy one, then it might help your favorite restaurant or your favorite clothing store
Mm-hmm.
stay in business through this temporary, hopefully temporary, which it was, very difficult time.
Sure.
And Flo ended up creating a podcast about small business survival and how you can think creatively, where we interviewed everything from entrepreneurs that had found creative paths to uh, accounting experts that
Mm-hmm.
were providing guidance on PPP
Mm-hmm.
and how to stay afloat financially beyond
Right.
just relying on your community, etc. And honestly, it was something to keep me busy because I'm the type of
Sure.
person where if I'm not contributing something good,
Right.
especially during a hard time,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, like I'm just gonna go cry in a corner. And I did not want to and there was enough to be depressed about during the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
that I thought, all right, let me put and a lot of the storytelling business was also slowing down
Right.
because people
Mm-hmm.
like production is hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to
Yeah.
do remotely. And so things were slowing down on our business end too. And I thought, let me just do something to distract myself from the fact that things really stink right now
Mm-hmm.
and try to help others. And so we did this thing, and it was never meant to be permanent, just a bridge to help people through a hard time.
And you started Radius in November 2020. That was major third wave at that point. The key about Radius is that it's a different type of home working. What was the genesis of that and why November 2020? Because that was not a
Oh
great
my
time
God.
for most people in the country.
It wasn't, but it was in some ways great for us in the sense that we were building a product to enable flexible work styles and to launch it when practically every company on the planet is discussing flexible work styles. The timing was impeccable. And
Mm-hmm.
if we could make work more profitable for companies, but also more fulfilling to working professionals, especially during a hard time, then what better time to do it? So the initial spark was in August of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We're just about to come out of lockdowns, I think, at that time. And I'm an Airbnb host. My partner and I,
Okay.
we have a unit in the downstairs of our house,
Okay.
kind of a mother-in-law unit, a
Right.
studio apartment that we were renting out on Airbnb pre-pandemic.
Okay.
And it covers about 2/3 of our mortgage.
That's nice.
And we shut it down during the
Mm-hmm.
lockdowns. And as we were given notice from the powers that be that we could open it back up again, we were hesitant. And the biggest reason was laundry. The idea of
Mm.
washing strangers' linens during a
Okay.
pandemic was just a little too intimate for us.
Right.
And so we kept it closed. But in August, Gabe and I sat down and we realized we can't keep it closed indefinitely
Mm-hmm.
because that's a significant chunk of our family income that we were
Right.
just kissing goodbye. So we asked ourselves, how can we get back to hunting in a way that feels safer? Well, we'd have to eliminate the laundry component.
Mm-hmm.
But to do that, you have to get rid of the overnight part
Yep.
of the
Right.
stays.
Got it.
And at the time, there were no platforms that cater to day only use. Airbnb, VRBO,
Oh.
they're all for overnight,
Sure. Sure.
which necessitates laundry.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's occurring to us that because we're still technically in lockdowns, a lot of our neighbors are working from home, their kids are home from school,
Mm.
dogs are barking. How do How does a working parent get anything done?
Very
And so we
problematic.
thought, what if we outfit that space downstairs with a sit-stand desk? We upgrade the Wi-Fi and we
Mhm.
invite our neighbors to get a solo escape for their workday.
Right.
In by 9, at 9, out by 5, easy peasy, no laundry.
Right. And they're ecstatic.
And they are loving it. And after a little bit of testing, we also start talking to some friends of ours in the Airbnb hosting community,
Mm,
and they start telling us about additional pain points
okay.
that this solves that
Right.
we had never considered.
What were the additional pain points? I'm curious.
Well, so for example, Airbnb sometimes gets a bad rap for parties
Mhm.
and causing big disturbances in the neighborhood. Well, when do parties happen? They happen at night.
Right.
Weird if an idea like this is day only and it's just for the purpose of work, not
Yep.
only is the likelihood of parties reduced,
Yep.
but we're actually putting working professionals in your home for the purpose of sitting down with a laptop
Right. Yep.
versus recreating on vacation, whatever that means. And so
Exactly. Yep.
there's a lot of risk mitigation because of
Sure.
that. Less
Mhm.
wear and tear because they're
Yep.
there only for the day and not staying overnight. And so
Yep.
there were a few things that ended up snowballing there. So now fast forward, we're now in the fall and companies are starting to make headlines about permanent remote work policies. They're spending big dollars just to cancel leases. Pinterest paid almost $90 million just to cancel a lease in
Mhm.
favor of more flexible work. And
Mhm.
Gabe and I looked at each other and we're like, wait a minute. This is a lot more than just a neighborhood
Yep.
initiative. This could be a B2B platform.
Mhm.
And so I started talking to companies about what they need, started courting some potential co-founders that are software
Mhm.
developers, teamed
Right.
up with two of them, and we started building. And we learned that really what companies' biggest pain point moving forward post-pandemic was more than just getting people out of their houses for a private day
Mhm.
of quiet. While that certainly was important to them, the bigger need was how do we get people back together in person if we
Mhm.
A, no longer have an office, or
Right.
B, we have an office that people don't want to go to.
Right.
And thus Radious was born.
Well, it's 2021, and I imagine that with the different waves, with the different challenges that people had in whether they would come back, whether they felt safe or not, and all those different things. So 2021 was a difficult year in terms of that flow. And then 22, people are feeling more comfortable. Companies are really starting to go, okay, let's get people back in the office again. And that was a period where a lot of people were making different choices. Over the 21 and 22, what were you seeing in terms of the different types of people and companies who were contracting to allow their employees to come and book it for the day? And it can be any different kind of combination. They're all homes, is that correct?
95% of them are homes, yes.
Okay.
So it could be a house, it could also be an ADU in the backyard. Part of the appeal is that our inventory is quite varied. And so if
Mhm.
you need a space just for two people, you
Right.
can pay less.
Hmm.
If you need a space for 20, you can find that too, and everything in between. So, but predominantly residential. And the biggest reason is, well, people don't want to commute to city centers anymore.
Right.
So if we
Right.
can say it's down the street at your neighbor's house,
Right.
that mitigates a big pain point. And people have gotten used to having the comforts of home.
What proportion was it of individuals wanting an out of home experience versus companies saying we don't have an office or we want to save you the commute and that we're going to sign up with you for multiple people wherever they might be so that they have the option? Because I know there are many companies that now too, but certainly then were giving people different types of co-working or other office space type arrangements.
And that shifted over the course of 2021 and
Mhm.
2022, partly because the world sentiments were evolving, but partly because our model was evolving. Because
Mhm. Okay.
at the beginning, we launched more as a B2C platform,
Oh,
thinking
yeah.
that
Okay.
individuals who were suffering at home were going to need an escape. But then we started talking to companies and saw that there's a bigger opportunity to serve individuals if we go through their employer versus the individuals paying for the space out of pocket.
Right.
We should really be making the corporations pay for it, especially if they are saving thousands, potentially millions of dollars a year on real estate because they no longer have offices. If they can reinvest a small fraction of that by offering on-demand space to their employees, and their employees can just book it at will for free, that is serving those individuals much better. So it certainly evolved. There are some companies that from the beginning of the pandemic were hell-bent on getting people back to the office. Come hell or high water, those companies still exist. Thankfully, they are in the minority.
Post 2022, we're 2023. It's the first full year post-pandemic. What was the evolution then? Yes, thankfully, by the end of the 2023, Nick Bloom's data shows that we're at a stasis. Stayed at basically 28 point something or 29% of US companies have hybrid models. Unfortunately, still mostly fixed hybrid models, but we're going to get there. There were a lot of battles going on from the fall of 2022 until the end of 2023. What was happening in your world? How was it manifesting in terms of the types of companies, the size of companies? Because a lot of the smaller companies have much more flexible arrangements. So I imagine that that would be more of your client base.
One thing that as a team we've had to bear in mind, and I'm so thrilled that we came to this realization, and I hope that most of the world realizes this too, is that the headlines that we see about companies forcing people back to the office, those headlines are usually made by the biggest companies on the planet. These companies have huge, huge resources. They have, therefore, the largest PR megaphones. They also have the largest real estate holdings. So there are a lot of sunk costs there. And so every time you read a headline that so-and-so is forcing people back to the office, I think it's important to realize that because they have the biggest PR teams, they're the ones that are going to be making the headlines. They don't necessarily represent the majority. In fact, Brian Elliott said this several months ago now at this point, and I keep repurposing it because I think he's spot on, that for every one CEO forcing people back to the office, there are two CEOs at smaller companies stealing their top talent.
The Conference Board data said at the end of 2023 that only 4% of US CEOs were prioritizing 5-day-a-week full-time RTO. In the Americas and Europe, it was like maybe 5 or 6%, but it never went above 6%, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a bell curve. It's a bell curve. The vast minority is forcing people back 5 days a week. A larger minority is going fully remote, no office, still gathering intentionally. But then the majority is testing out some form of hybrid. And there are many forms, as we know. And there is no one size fits all. But what my crystal ball says is that the majority of companies that are trying hybrid right now are not necessarily doing so because they think that that's the right path long term. It's because they're stuck with an office they can't offload. So of course, they're going to try to get butts in seats while they have this lease. Once that lease expires, why pay for that office space 7 days a week if your people are only using it once or twice? It doesn't actually make fiscal sense to do so. It makes much more sense to go flex and pay on demand.
Because the smaller companies are typically much more flexible, hybrid, of course, but they are much more flexible in terms of the arrangements, because that's one of the great benefits of your model is that you allow for a fixed hybrid model, yes, but you're also allowing for someone to maybe work at this house this week and then another house. I like lots of different varieties. So going to different spaces is very interesting to me. That was the evolution that you saw during 2023. Were there other things that surprised you? The real battle and all those words that were used in the media. It was interesting to see how it was viewed as such a power play. It was not helpful and productive. But the companies that you were dealing with, they were fully on board with the change?
Some, not all.
Okay.
Our focus was on small to medium-sized companies. And when I say medium, we capped it at 20,000 employees.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't a hard cap, but a 20,000 person organization is not exactly small.
No.
Maybe you could even consider it large. So it's on the larger end of medium. But we were seeing that the companies who were at least offering some flexibility to companies were the ones who were open-minded to new ways of working and supporting their people beyond just what was necessary for the bottom line, that they actually showed some genuine care for their teams. And so that was really our focus. It's not that we were closed off to working with big companies, because I actually do think that there's an opportunity there. Because big companies, they do hire in distributed fashions. And so just because they may have big offices in a small handful of markets in the country, and right now we're still just a national firm, they may still have clusters of 5 or 10 or 15 people all across the country without an office to go to. And if the only option that you're really giving them as an employer is to work from home or maybe go to a coffee shop, well, is that truly sufficient? And are they going to get together in person and develop that camaraderie and have work-life separation? And so there's absolutely an opportunity for us to serve those bigger companies. But as a startup, because we are still a young company, those cycles are very long.
Yeah.
And if there is lower hanging fruit with smaller companies that are already thinking more flexibly, then why not?
I do think that they will get there. Most of those big companies too. And many more companies who haven't really committed to it, because it's not just about saying, okay, you're working from home sometimes. There's asynchronous working methods and all those other things that have to go together with that to do it properly and organize get-togethers and choose different types of locations at different times so people can have those in-person gatherings when they have 5 or 6 people at a particular location. They can actually choose a nice home-based office location for people to get together, which isn't anywhere close to their office. Fantastic.
Right.
But they're not thinking like that yet.
They're not. And if I may vent to frustrations,
please.
It's that there are a lot of leadership teams who proclaim that remote work isn't sustainable because they never learned how to manage in those sorts of environments. And they throw their hands up, they say, this doesn't work, they give up, and they force people back. And then we see headlines, et cetera, et cetera. And some people read those headlines and they don't necessarily look under the hood to understand the full situation. And then they conclude that remote and flexible work isn't sustainable. And so they get on the RTO bandwagon and it starts to snowball there. There's a lot of misinformation out there because people just don't put the effort in. And I can understand why. It takes effort to make an effort, right? It's easier to just go back to what we already know. But that's not how we move forward.
Well, exactly. And it really isn't. I mean, from my conversation with Phil Kirshner, he and I are very much on the same page that way before the pandemic, that adapting to new ways of working in their entirety, never mind location, that's just one piece of it, is inevitable and absolutely unavoidable for companies really adapting their businesses to frequently pivoting. We don't actually know what the next step is going to be going forward. We can't project that much in advance. We have to think flexibly. I'm thankful that we're now starting 2024, and by far the majority have understood that this is where we are. And it now is the next steps. And it's very interesting to me, the flexible model that you have and the different types of configurations that you're really giving people makes it a lot of fun. You can have a lot of variety, because one of the things about work is when you've been going to a place which is often really not conducive to anything positive, and you can change some of those environments and have some more variety and be connecting with different people in different places. And I think that's fantastic.
And that's another thing that I wish more of the world explicitly understood. I think implicitly they do, but it's not always consciously top of mind. A lot of people equate remote work with working from home. Still, years after the pandemic has really ended, they were absolutely synonyms during the pandemic because there was nowhere else to go.
Right.
But now, and maybe we just need a different term for it, but now I see remote work as an umbrella term that encompasses a wide variety of
For sure.
ways and places to work from, including working from home,
Yep.
but also the beach, a co-working space, a Radious space, a friend's house. And
Forget
it
what the
doesn't have
last
to be in isolation either,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
It can be together. That's the other thing. People are equating remote work with isolation. Well, only if you're cooped up at home. Let's not generalize the
Yep.
pain points of working from home to remote work as a whole when they are no longer synonyms. We can be together in remote settings. And so for anybody who says remote work doesn't work, it's unsustainable because of all of these things, no, you just have the wrong definition. And we need to clear that up.
The last time I looked at the stat, it was something pretty high in terms of how many people were regularly working remotely from the office, but they weren't working at home. There are 3 on my blog that I can use on a daily basis. So I want to see what the different options are, not be isolated because I do so much working from home, to have the home studio and stuff. But it takes time to work it out.
It really does. It takes introspection both on the individual level and at the company level. Who are we as an organization? And it also takes a level of empathy and leadership, because, and this could be an entirely separate podcast episode altogether, but there are a lot of people who have never thought about their work preferences before
No,
at all
absolutely.
because
Yep.
they went to an office 9 to 5. They didn't
They
think
had no
about what
choice.
time of day is best for them, right? There are some people that have just graduated from college, have never even been in the workforce. So they don't even have any experience to pull
Exactly.
from to identify their preferences. So I'm a pretty introspective person. I know that I work better at certain times of day and I know when I need to take breaks, etc. But not everybody has the experience to do that. And so I think that leadership needs to upskill themselves on helping
Yes.
their teammates introspect in this way and then work together to set team level agreements on these expectations. And of course, not everybody is going to be happy at all times, but if we know that so and so prefers this style of communication during these hours, then we can align to be as inclusive as we can,
Yep.
within reason.
Exactly. And I think for me, that's the huge win-win with all of this, all of these changes, is that we can achieve better results for the business because we're happier, more aligned. We've actually understood more about how we individually work best and together with our teammates. And we compromise. I mean, I understand more about what your situation is. So therefore, I can cover for you sometimes. And it really becomes a very different type of interaction and relationships as we're working together as a team. And have
Sure.
you had some of those conversations with the companies? Part of that discussion actually needs to be had in order for them to have a really successful relationship with you and to have that long term because they need to be on that journey and learning as they go.
Yes. So for us as a startup, as we grow, it is more efficient to find companies who are already thinking in this way.
For sure, yeah. Mhm.
The long-term vision is absolutely identifying those companies who are open-minded but still need a little bit of assistance. And we
Mhm.
can help with that
Right.
sort of coaching, but we're also partnering with people who specialize in that
Yep.
so that they can help as well. The other thing that we're talking to companies about that's related but not exactly the same is also about how much autonomy drives motivation at their organization.
Mhm.
Autonomy is according to self-determination theory, one of 3 innate human needs for optimal functioning.
Mhm.
So not just at work, but in life.
Mhm.
You give people a sense of freedom, and they are far more effective. It's
Yeah.
just, it's a studied fact that I think
Right.
by this point we can all agree
Yep.
that feeling free feels good. Okay, but it's tough to give people a free for all because then you could have chaos at your organization. So there need to be some frameworks for that freedom
Mhm.
and some expectation setting. As a platform that is trying to sell a service to companies that we want their employees to use.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing for us to convince the CFO or HR that they need flexible workspaces for their employees. And we get a contract, they sign on the dotted line, they cut us a check, we're happy. But if their employees never use it, they're going to cancel that contract like that.
For the change management.
As a startup, we need to be working with those companies to make sure that they have a framework, a process, a philosophy even, that makes their employees want to use our service. And that comes from having a culture of autonomy and having bottom-up approaches, not top-down mandates. So that's another thing that we're looking for in our customers is what companies or what departments within company are actively giving their employees the freedom to choose, but also empowering them to make those choices. Because it's not enough to just say, all right, take your pick, because that can also cause analysis paralysis, and then nobody ever does anything.
Right.
So again, psychology, right? Having that background is helpful in almost every context.
Yeah.
And so we're working with companies that either have already succeeded in doing this, or we're working with those who understand that this is important, but haven't necessarily implemented everything yet, and we get to help them.
That's fun. This is a great journey that you're on because there is so much involved. The clients that I typically get are the ones who get it and exactly the same and understand that it's hard. And so they need some help getting there.
Yeah.
What haven't I asked you that I should have done?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would love to share, my why for what I'm doing. And if for no other reason than to just remind myself.
Okay.
Because building a startup, I like to say that my team and I, we're building a Fortune 500 company from scratch right now. It is hard. It's really hard. Even though the timing couldn't be better and the market opportunity is huge. Right. It is really hard to build a startup. And having a strong sense of purpose that is about more than just a payday at the end of the journey is really important. And I think it's important for, frankly, anyone. Whether you're building a startup, you lead a team at a large company, or anything in between, having a strong sense of purpose is what unites us in our teams, but it makes the whole journey more personally fulfilling. And I am a big fan of Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He talks all about finding meaning in your suffering. And when you build a startup, you are signing yourself up for a whole hell of a lot of suffering. But when there's meaning in it, then you get up every morning prepared to wade through the muck and make it happen. And for me, it's multifold. Part of it is because I feel really privileged to have had a career that has brought me joy. I find what I've done, everything that I've done, really personally fulfilling. And I would love to make that possible for others. And I believe that Radious can play a part in helping bring fulfillment and work-life balance to thousands, maybe millions of people eventually. So that's part one. Part two is I believe really strongly in environmental and social causes. And the idea of taking cars off roads because people no longer have to commute to a city center and burn all those fossil fuels getting to a faraway office when they can just walk 3 doors down to their neighbor's guest house turned office and collaborate with other people in their vicinity. That, oh my goodness, motivates me so much. And then the third aspect is more of the social side, reducing proximity bias. People who already struggle for equality in the workplace are at risk of being disproportionately disadvantaged further because of proximity bias. That combined with the idea of neighbors booking each other's homes for the purpose of work. Now you have an excuse to talk to somebody that you might pass by with your dog every day, but have never had a chance to talk. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about benign things like door codes and Wi-Fi passwords, but that might be the foot in the door to developing a deeper relationship with somebody in your community. And so building this platform where work-equipped homes can be available to people inside of that community to go and work from, and then see their colleagues and work once a week. It doesn't have to be every day. Once a week, getting to spend time with the boss, having your work a little bit more recognized, having work-life separation, getting a change of scenery, seeing how other people in your community decorate their homes. I mean, that's fun. Patronizing local restaurants for lunch and supporting local small business because you've gotten out of your house. There's so many benefits, and that's a big reason why I'm so excited to be building this thing.
It was John Reardon who actually brought it up to me the first time, but I'd heard it later from Dan Murph too about the importance of building local community. However many days or remote 5 days a week, people really connecting with others in the local community. What can a small and medium-sized company be thinking about the paradigm of working from home or working from a third place, or how should they be thinking about the combination of working in the office and elsewhere that you find is the most compelling way to think about this going forward?
Just remember that even those who love working from home still like to get a change of scenery from time to time, or might need for their mental health an escape once in a while. And even those extroverts who love being around people sometimes like having some solitude, and that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and that it doesn't have to be this two-sided equation where it's either the office or it's working from home. There are countless other options. And for those who are interested in the way that Radious works, the part of it that I think really stands out as being unique is that it combines all of the benefits of both the office and working from home with none of the downsides. You don't have the commute of the office. You don't have the cost of the office or the hassle of it. But you still have the camaraderie of seeing people in person. You have that work-life separation, that escape from distractions. You still have the comforts of home. You still get all the workplace amenities. And so it's listening to your people, but also recognizing that there's a lot that is felt that is not necessarily said out loud. And that people really appreciate being given options.
And that is a perfect note to end on, because I could not agree with you more. Amina, thank you so much for your time sharing your stories and the whole journey along the way, and the journey that you are on now. As hard as it may feel sometimes, I do believe that what you're doing and how you're doing it and the way you're thinking about it is very much part of the future.
Well, thank you. And thank you also for asking really important questions, not just of me, but of all of your guests who are amazing. You've had some amazing guests on this show, and all people that I look up to and am very fortunate to consider friends, many of them.
Thanks again so much to Amina Moreau, founder and CEO of Radious. You can follow Amina on LinkedIn and find out more about Radious at radious.pro, radious.pro, as well as on X at Radious Pro and Instagram at radius.pro. Immediate action tip. It doesn't have to be a two-sided equation, either working at the office or from home. There are many other options to consider to support your employees, which don't have the costs or commute of an office, yet offer camaraderie and community. To understand how flexibility is integral to modern work and a human-centric approach to improve employees' experiences and business outcomes, please listen to or look at my book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You could also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, commentary, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.